In a dark room, a man says that this is what the situation represents. Then he calmly places a white piece on a go board. This man wearing sunglasses seems deeply focused on the match he is playing. At that moment, a hand firmly places a black piece on the board. The man then looks at the game and says he sees an inexplicable move on the board. In a fit of anger, he starts messing up all the pieces scattered across the table. Right then, he yells that there is a move there that should have never existed. Cutting to the next scene, we see a young man with purple hair, his face and suit covered in dirt. Next, a group of men in suits runs desperately through a warehouse. The story then flashes back 10 years into the past, showing where it all began. There, we are introduced to a boy named Won Do-yun, who was only 9 years old at the time. The boy lived in the poorest neighborhood of Guncheong's District 1, and living with him was his younger sister, Won Ah-yun, who was only 8 years old. During one afternoon, a soccer ball flies through the sky of that poor neighborhood. Some kids yell not to pass the ball to little Do-yun. Because of that, all the other boys run to try and stop the kid. The boy runs with determination in his eyes, not caring about the others. He then kicks the ball, and the goalie flinches out of fear, letting in a goal. One of the boys gets mad and yells, asking what kind of goalie flinches away from the ball. The ball then bounces on the ground after hitting the wall hard. The boy is then left alone, described as the lowest among the low. He was the weakest in a world full of hostility and brutality. One of the boys tells him to stop, because his parents must be looking for him. Then, he walks away, telling them to leave him alone since he already played with them. At that moment, a foot steps on the ball, and a man calls the boy a brat. This man is Kim Moo-won, the boss of a small neighborhood crew. Then, he kicks the ball toward the boy and tells him to come along. The ball rolls to the boy's feet, but he refuses the man's invitation. The youth says he can't afford to take on any more debts to pay off. Moo-won then insists and says he has the perfect job for the boy. The kid breaks into a sweat, feeling apprehensive about the crew boss's proposal. With no choice, he ends up giving in and asks where they are going. When they arrive, the boy's sister is already there, and the man says that place is their home. The man then mocks them, asking what kind of home has absolutely nothing inside. It is said that Kim Moo-won is someone who doesn't really fit into that poor neighborhood. Inside the messy place, he tells the two siblings to sit down anywhere. The man says he is starving, but the boy says he just wants the job. Then, the older man tears open a pack of ramen with his teeth and says he's the one who's hungry. He throws several packs of ramen on the floor and tells the two to clean their clothes. The youth and his sister stay silent, observing all that mess. The man then asks why they are so quiet and says he has more now than before. With a smirk, he offers to pay more and calls the boy spoiled. The boy starts tidying things up and tells his sister not to touch anything. Shortly after, he asks if the job is done once he finishes the cleaning. But the man appears with a pot, says no, and invites them to eat. He then reveals that part of their job is simply being his meal companions. With that, the man explains that no one should eat alone and invites them over. The youth then sighs and tells him to deduct the food from his daily pay. The older man puts his hand on the boy's head and calls him sassy. Next, he gives him another task and tells the youth to check the Dongxian route. While they eat, the boy keeps thinking about all the work he has to do. The man then advises him not to take sports so seriously. Then, the three eat together in that house, and the man gets lost in thought about the boy. While eating, the youth wonders how he plans to grow up behaving like that. Elsewhere, the boy trains with Chu Dongxian, a former MMA fighter. Dongxian is Moo-won's right-hand man and belongs to the Gunilpa crew. The youth's eyes then light up, and he takes on a very serious expression. The former fighter watches him, thinking about how their crew was a bit different. With his eyes glowing, the youth prepares a punch with all his might. Then, the punch hits the training pad his coach was holding dead center. The coach smirks slightly while watching the boy's massive effort during training. With that, he hands 2 eggs to the boy, saying they were different. The youth stares at the food in his hands, feeling a bit surprised by the gesture. Next, we see the little guy doing push-ups while the older man supervises everything. The boy was dripping with sweat, pushing himself to the absolute limit to endure that heavy training. Then, he delivers a lightning-fast punch, cutting through the air under his master's watchful eye. Besides training, the boy also worked delivering newspapers around the neighborhood. Even at home, the boy spent the night studying while the older man slept on the couch. With all this effort, the youth saved every single penny he could make. The boy used a plastic water bottle as a piggy bank, and it was already almost full. Time passes, and we see the boy a bit older, adjusting his school uniform. He mentions that by being around those criminals, he ended up learning how to endure hardships. The youth walks across the school courtyard, passing right by the other students. As he walks, he thinks that if his parents were still alive, he would never know the heavy burden of living like this. Then he takes a deep sigh, stopping right in front of the sports gym door. Inside, the boy runs at high speed after a ball, playing soccer. With sweat dripping down his face, the boy felt that he had finally found some hope. However, the coach calls him over, and the boy realizes the day he dreaded so much had arrived. The youth stops running, turns his head, and looks at the man with a worried expression. Coming closer, the man asks if his body has been feeling too heavy lately. With that, the older man lets him know that they are planning to bench the youth for the next match. Hearing this, the boy nods his head, keeping a very sad expression. He turns his back and starts walking away, admitting that he really was feeling heavy. Holding a ring of keys, he thinks that what was truly heavy was the pocket of that corrupt coach. The boy walks toward a large green gate, thinking that this might actually be a good thing. At that moment, he remembers a girl, thinking that sports were supposed to be something very fair and clean. But unlocking the door, he realizes that place was just the same, and now he could quit without any guilt. However, suddenly some boys from the team yell out, mockingly calling him an orphan. The three laugh at his face, mocking the fact that the youth has no mother and definitely no father. The red-haired boy smirks and says he came to teach him a lesson, because he thought the youth was an idiot. The black-haired boy just stares at the rich kid very coldly, without saying a word. Furious, the redhead claims he is off the team simply because he is poor and doesn't have a family. He points to the field and says that out of all the players there, the youth was the only one who didn't pay. The protagonist remains unfazed, merely thanking him for the information with a blank expression on his face. With that, he calmly turns the key in the padlock to open the equipment door. Seeing that he is being ignored, the rich kid sighs, completely losing his patience with the situation. The youth unlocks and pulls open the iron door, paying absolutely no attention to the insults. Right then, the bully reaches out and shoves the protagonist's head hard against the wall. Yelling in hatred, the redhead says the boy's quiet attitude makes him sick to his stomach. The bully grabs the back of the youth's neck, stating that even if he had money, he would never get to play. With that, the redhead keeps insulting the boy, warning him that he doesn't have permission to do anything there. Then, the bully pokes the youth's head with his finger, saying his lifestyle is the reason for all of this. He keeps pressing down on the boy's head, throwing the fact that he has no parents right in his face. The rich kid looks at the protagonist mockingly, wanting to know if he's trying to act tough. At that moment, the bully loses his patience and kicks the boy's back with immense force. But the youth just takes the hit with his head down, admitting that he had already figured out the situation. Right then, the boy's eyes flash red, showing he knew exactly who was backing the redhead. Then, in a swift motion, the protagonist lands a powerful punch right on the rich bully's face. The impact is so strong that the kid gets knocked back, his face completely distorted by the blow. With that, the redhead falls to the ground defeated. While the youth tells him to stop talking so much garbage, the boy gets ready to strike again, warning that doing this would make him feel less guilty about what he's about to do. Without mercy, the protagonist kicks the fallen bully's body, not caring at all about who was watching. At that moment, he kicks a soccer ball with all his accumulated strength and rage. Then, the youth unleashes a powerful shot, aiming directly at the boy lying on the ground. The ball flies at high speed and hits the goal net, shaking the field's entire iron structure. With that, the boy lets out a laugh of relief while the corrupt coach watches everything in total shock. The man wearing sunglasses panics and yells, furious at his student's behavior. But the protagonist just steps over the fallen kid and warns that he'd let it slide just for today. A few days after all this chaos, we see a meeting room with the school board directors. They are discussing the violent incident that took place between students of the same grade on the field. The principal warns that the youth has already been disqualified from sports, and the school has decided to expel him. The boy defends himself, saying he didn't start the fight, and wants to know why only he is being punished. Angry, the boy glares at the men, questioning if all of this was just because he is poor and an orphan. He keeps pressing them, asking if the reason was the criminal organization backing the other student. At that, the protagonist gives a sly smirk, mocking that the school has finally taught him something useful. Then, he turns his back and walks out the door, telling those old men to keep living their lives like that. The youth walks alone through the streets, reflecting that the world had already been ruled by gangsters for a long time. He remembers that these thugs started collecting fees, pretending to protect people from other crews. Because of this, massive organizations were born, spreading a fake peace like poison across the entire city. The boy lowers his head sadly, noticing that the number of miserable people like him was only increasing. Right then, he uses his arm to wipe his face, trying to contain his emotions in the face of so much injustice. The view of that poor neighborhood under the sunset clearly showed the harsh reality everyone lived in. The protagonist clenches his fists and finally understands the real reason why he hit rock bottom. He raises his head with a serious and determined gaze, looking up at the purple and orange-stained sky. With his eyes glowing, he realizes that this whole situation was wrong from the very start. Cutting to the next scene, we see the boy standing in front of a stained metal door in a dark hallway. He pushes the door open, thinking about the human trash that dominated the city, from the lowest thugs to the top bosses. The boy walks up the stairs, determined to use the law of the strongest to turn the tables in his favor. Reaching the top, he finds a room filled with muscular, dangerous men who glare right back at him. A bearded man on the couch recognizes the boy and asks why the look in his eyes is so different. All the henchmen in that warehouse watch the high school kid who just barged into their space. Without wasting time, the boy drops his heavy backpack onto the floor, making a loud thud from the weight of the object. He opens the bag, showing all his savings, and warns that it was double what he owed. The older man glares at the boy seriously and says he never actually lent him any money. But the protagonist fires back, stating that he added up the value of every single time the man fed him. The gang boss gets irritated, saying he doesn't need that chump change, and tells the boy to get lost right away. However, the youth grips his pants tightly and insists that this is his final reckoning with the past. The mobster warns that he is being nice and tells the boy to shut up and listen if he wants to keep living there. Ignoring the threat, the student stands tall and declares that he has something very important to say to the boss. At that, the older man narrows his eyes, intrigued by the courage of this mere teenager. Then, the protagonist bows as a sign of respect and makes a shocking request to be adopted by him. With a dark look, the boy promises to deliver something the man always wanted but could never manage to get. The whole crew is shocked by the boy's audacity, while the boss remains seated in silence. The gang leader focuses his gaze on the youth, analyzing whether this was just a joke or something serious. He remarks that he always wondered how the boy would grow up, but notes that only his body has changed. Giving a slight smirk, the man questions why the boy thinks he knows what he truly wants. Without hesitating, the protagonist answers that the mobster's goal is to take the top spot in the organization. With red eyes and an intimidating posture, the youth guarantees that he will secure that position for the boss. The man listens intently while the boy points out that, unlike him, he has never broken a promise. Finding the situation amusing, the mobster says the boy is completely absurd for showing up there speaking so formally. The older man glares at him up close, asking why he even came if he already knew the answer. At that, the boy points his finger down and answers with great confidence that the plan would work. The mobster gets quite confused by the answer and questions why he was the one chosen. The student looks at him seriously, saying that only he could handle a certain someone. With his eyes glowing red, the youth guarantees that the leader was the only one capable of tearing down Daekyung. Intrigued, the older man leans back on the couch, asking what the boy was basing all this madness on. Then, the protagonist smiles slightly, stating that he saw his henchman fighting with his own eyes. The man smokes his cigarette while the boy remembers when he first arrived in Guncheong's District 1. At that, he mentions that he saw the boss and his subordinates acting like absolute monsters back then. The youth recalls that there were only 5 men from the crew facing an entire crowd. But he quickly corrects himself, saying that actually, only 2 of them were doing all the dirty work. At that moment, a crowd of armed thugs appears completely cornered by those 2. The henchmen fought brutally, taking down several enemies at once with total ease. One of the boss's allies lands a direct hit on an enemy, knocking him down without the slightest mercy. With that, another thug takes an incredibly powerful punch to the face, getting thrown backward. The fight was so violent that the 2 henchmen looked like absolute demons, terrifying everyone there. One of the subordinates grabs a heavy pickaxe and strikes his opponents without a second thought. Facing that terrifying scene, the rival thugs could only scream in absolute horror. The boy remembers that they didn't even give the enemies a chance to run away, slaughtering everyone there. Hidden behind a wall, the young boy and his sister watched everything in shock and deep fear. With his eyes wide open, the youth states that he could never forget that incredible scene he witnessed. The memory ends by showing the backs of those 2 men, who looked like giants in the boy's eyes. Hearing the story, the mobster rests his hand on his face, trying to remember if that actually happened. At that, the two henchmen mentioned glare at the boss, confirming that the boy's story was true. The other member of the crew also confirms it, explaining that it happened right after they arrived in that district. The man lowers his head, cutting off the explanation and admitting that it was already enough. Satisfied, the student turns toward the door, saying he had already heard plenty. Then, the boy grabs the handle and warns that now it was too late for them to try and stop that plan. Firmly, he turns the metal lock, preparing to leave that dark warehouse behind. The henchmen look at the boss, wanting to know what he would do after everything they just heard. One of them warns that the boy is dangerous, and a small crew like theirs shouldn't get mixed up in this. The leader leans his head back and remarks that it had been a long time since they last disagreed. At that, the man glares at the ceiling, stating that no organization would be able to handle that boy. Throwing his arms back, he regrets that the boy wasn't able to hold out for just 2 more years. The boss recalls that he treated the youth like a son, but didn't expect him to ask to be adopted all over again. At that moment, he remembers the boy's old words, saying he wanted to be just like him. The memory shows the little boy waving happily and stating that when he grew up, he would be just like his dad. Back in the present, the man complains that the boy blurts these things out of nowhere, proving he wasn't normal. With that, he sits up on the couch, adjusting his posture, and keeps repeating that sassy youth's words. The man then gets up and opens an old cardboard box, saying it had been a very long time. Looking inside the box, he finds some school supplies and a picture frame with a graduation photo. At that, he carefully picks up a crumpled piece of paper, feeling all the nostalgia and weight of those memories. Cutting to the next scene, we see an ominous truck and a sneaker left on the ground against a completely red background. Next, we see a funeral altar with photos of the boy's parents surrounded by beautiful white flowers. A man in a suit reports a constant failure in fulfilling duties and internal disturbances caused. The man enters the office of a large corporation while the narration speaks about negligence at work. Several men in suits glare at the scene with glowing eyes, complaining about the losses caused to the entire company. At that, an official document reveals the transfer of manager Kim Moo-won to Guncheong's District 1. Carrying his belongings in a box, the man walks away from his old position down the hallway. With his head down, he leads his team members, who are also carrying their own moving boxes. The group arrives in an empty, dark room that looks like a place completely abandoned for many years. Despite the new situation, the men show themselves determined to secure control over all areas of the neighborhood. Without losing time, the team starts cleaning up all the dirt and moving heavy furniture to set up the new place. The former manager walks out to the balcony holding a box in his hands with a very tired expression. He then reads the transfer notice again, seemingly accepting his new fate in that poor place. But in a moment of pure frustration, he crumbles the paper with immense force, showing all his pent-up rage. The boss sits in the dark with his hand on his head, completely despondent, tossing the crumpled paper to the floor. However, his blue eyes glow intensely through his fingers, revealing that he wasn't going to give up just like that. Returning to the present, the man sighs, closing the old cardboard box while processing his memories. With a serious look, the mobster realizes that that sassy brat really knew how to get inside his head. Suddenly, the man hears knocks on the door echoing through the silent, dark room. From the other side of the door, a familiar voice announces himself as Song Jae and asks to enter the room. At that, Song Jae carefully opens the door and pokes his head inside with a serious expression. He then enters the room and lets his boss know that he brought some medicine to help him. The boss sits on the floor next to some bottles and asks what happened to that youth. The leader explains that the boy was expelled after getting into a fight with some Daekyung students at school. Song Jae hands over the bottle and comments that this was inevitable since the boy's life has been quite rough. The boss holds the drink and asks in surprise if his colleague was referring to young Ah-yun. The other man confirms it, saying the boy has always been a rather strange and different child. The two look at each other while drinking, and Song Jae questions what his leader intends to do about the boy. He warns that a boy that determined would be much more dangerous if he joined a rival crew. The boss downs the bottle and suggests that maybe it's best they take him in before others do. Afterward, he sets the bottle on the floor and questions if the other team members agree with the idea. Song Jae mentions that one of the members wants to make the boy a fighter right now. He also questions if the youth would be satisfied with just that, since he seems built for something bigger. With that, he suggests that the best move for the boy is to keep him close so he doesn't spin out of control. The boss points to the bottle and praises his subordinate's logical reasoning, as always. But he decides that he needs to hear from the boy himself what his true thoughts and plans are. At that, the gang leader asks seriously who is watching the youth at this exact moment. Song. Jay grabs his phone and asks if he should call someone and have them bring the boy to them. The boss tells him to hurry up before the boy meets up with a guy named Choi Dae. Yep. The subordinate then starts dialing the number on his phone quickly to carry out the order. On a call, the boss asks if the person is home, and the other voice confirms they are. The person on the phone asks the boy to drop by, and the youth listens to everything intently. With his eyes glowing red, the protagonist glares down the street with a very serious expression. Cutting to the next scene, a man in a suit tells his henchmen to come inside, but they complain about leaving the party. Their boss says he likes the place, and that they can keep drinking if it's still not enough. The subordinates grumble that they can't do anything about it, since it's a direct order from the crew boss. A man approaches, worried about issues in his territory, but the boss reassures him. As the leader walks away, the subordinate thanks him for being brought along for the celebration. We are introduced to Choi Dae, the boss of a small crew that controls District 2. He walks down the dark street, complaining that he rotted away in that dump for years, and there's nothing to celebrate. His dirty shoes show his frustration over being demoted to the absolute worst neighborhood. With his hands behind his back, he grumbles about having to play the thug on the streets all the time. The man is furious about being transferred to the company headquarters so suddenly. At that moment, he lights a cigarette, creating a trail of light in the city's dark night. Alone on a rooftop, he wonders what kind of massive mess they are planning for him. The mobster complains that things were better back when the cops themselves were the ones causing trouble. He keeps standing there on the rooftop under the city lights, thinking about his current situation. The man grabs his pack of cigarettes and turns around in surprise, asking what was going on there. One of his henchmen offers a cigarette, saying he feels more relaxed smoking with the boss. The leader invites him to drink a bit more together before they finally head inside. Suddenly, he turns to the side and questions the presence of Choi Dae in that place. The two men glare at the protagonist, who is standing alone in a dark alley right in front of them. The youth then starts walking toward them with his hands in his pockets and a confident air. With his red eyes glowing, he asks if that man in front of him is Choi Dae. The henchman lights the boss's cigarette, who asks what that kid dragged over there this time. But with his eyes glowing red, the subordinate guarantees that he will take care of that situation. However, the gang leader stops him with a gesture and tells him to forget about the matter for now. He turns to face the youth and, blowing out smoke, asks what he was supposed to be anyway. Analyzing the boy up close, he gets confused, wondering if it was just some random kid. The man gets annoyed, questioning what a brat is doing out on the street ruining an adult's mood. Losing his patience, he tells the boy to vanish from there before he sobers up and gets really angry. The student states that things never end well just with talking when he has his head screwed on straight. The scene pans out, showing the three standing in the alley with a lot of tension hanging in the air. The mobster's eye widens in surprise, and he asks if the boy really isn't going to leave. The youth answers with a focused gaze, saying that actually, he has something to collect there. With his intense red eyes, the protagonist glares at the man and says they need to talk. The gang boss looks visibly confused and repeats the word, talk, not understanding anything. The boy remembers he himself said it was important, and then says the word, justification. The leader comments that things have changed and now massive criminal syndicates control everything and watch each other. Looking at his watch, the youth questions since when thugs care about that kind of rule. Observing the city, he states that he is there precisely to find that so-called justification. The youth explains that he worked for 3 years for Gunilpa and didn't even receive 20% of what they owed. With a serious look, he states that everything is based on facts and that serves as justification. The boss smirks and says money isn't a matter for him to come complaining about in that place. With a mocking look, he suggests the boy take his complaint to their teachers. Turning his back, the man tells the boy not to be cocky and to get lost if he already got the message. But the youth doesn't move and questions if he would have come all the way there if that were enough. The man looks back, thinking that that boy must have completely lost his mind. Mocking him, he asks if the boy even knows the real meaning of the word justification. Furious, he yells that the justification the boy wants would cost the lives of 3 or 4 people. In a gesture of anger, the man throws away the cigarette he was holding with force. He then yells, asking if the youth thinks that kind of justification comes from a bit of spare change. With a furious expression, he repeats that nobody there is going to help the student at all. A government symbol appears, and he adds that nobody is going to help him anywhere. Crossing his hands, he states that the boy is the first one he has let slide past until now. The youth stares at his watch while the leader says that drunks talk too much, and that now it's for real. At that, the boy asks if his personal situation isn't enough as a justification. With a dark look, he then suggests the trafficking of orphaned children as justification. In a flashback, we see the younger boy sitting in a dirty room, reading a book. He rubs his head, looking quite worried about what was happening. Looking out the window, he saw some men dumping a child in that horrible neighborhood. A gagged man appears, and someone comments that they managed to score something big this time. A small, terrified child asks who they are while someone mentions they are 3 big shots. Furious, the man grabs the child's hair, saying they shouldn't have spoken to him. He tells his partner to cover the children's mouths and tie their wrists without leaving marks. The accomplice prepares the tape and comments that this wasn't their first time doing this. Suddenly, the young boy appears at the door and questions if they aren't from District 1. Without a second thought, the boy charges forward and lands a kick right on the man's face. Fallen on the ground, the boy complains that that place truly is a piece of garbage. The man wipes himself off and complains that not even the brats know their place anymore. Carrying a suitcase, the other guy says they will make good money and need to move fast. The 2 thugs start to leave, saying to hurry up before anyone sees them. The head of the kidnapper stops and looks back with a very intimidating expression. We see the youth still fallen on the ground, looking completely defeated and out of strength. Back in the present, the gang leader kicks the boy hard and questions him. With an insane smile, he says he isn't in the mood to deal with a body today. The protagonist writhes on the ground, feeling intense pain from the kick he received. The narration explains that people from District 2 kidnapped and sold children from District 1. Even though hurt, the boy stands up and asks if that is already enough for them. The youth adds that this is the justification for Gunilpa to take over District 2. The boss gets a surprised and at the same time interested look regarding the youth's proposal. We see a close-up on the boy's mouth as he gives a slight smile of confidence. The leader thinks that since things have reached this point, there's no turning back. With a sinister smile, the youth warns that he can't simply just let him walk away. At that, the henchman lunges forward and tries to throw a punch with all his might at the student's face. However, the boy moves with agility and manages to easily dodge the man's punch. With his eyes glowing intensely, the youth prepares a devastating counterattack, and he lands an incredibly powerful punch right in the man's stomach, who doubles over in pain. The boss's subordinate screams loudly, feeling all the agony of that blow. With his eyes glowing red, the youth prepares to strike the man again. Then, he lands a powerful kick on the man, sending him flying away with the force of the blow. The gang leader watches everything in complete shock, unable to believe what he is seeing. The henchman falls defeated to the ground, and the protagonist stands tall, watching him. Looking at his watch, the youth tells the boss that he simply wouldn't stop talking. With a serious look, he comments that he almost ran late for what he needed to do. The boss comments that the youth really is the type of guy who insists on this justification talk. With his eyes glowing in the dark, he admits that the boy is getting interesting. Suddenly, the leader lunges forward and lands a very heavy punch right on the protagonist's face. The youth manages to block the punch by crossing his arms in front of his face. With his eyes glowing, he states that that was going to happen either way. At that, the boy grabs his opponent's clothes, asking them not to drag things out so much next time. Squeezing the man's wrist, he comments that he doesn't know if they will see each other again. The mobster gets completely terrified, asking what the brat was doing. Then, the student grabs the boss's hair, saying the time has finally come. The man panics upon hearing that it was time for the legendary demon shark to lose. Facing his rival up close, the protagonist emphasizes the words about losing for the second time. Pulling the hair strands tighter, the youth remembers that those words came out of the thug's own mouth. With a swift movement, he warns that District 1 will vanish from the map forever, and a very loud impact sound echoes through the dark alley at that exact moment. The thug's feet quickly back away, while someone warns them to take their hands off right there. A massive man walks through the shadows, threatening anyone who touches his boy again. With a furious look, he guarantees he will rip everyone's eyes out next time. Elsewhere, a henchman on the phone asks where a dinner was taking place. The guy with his back turned confirms the location near the river, and says he already got the message. At that, he quickly hangs up the device, ending the call just like that. This tattooed big guy is the boss's right-hand man and a very dangerous former fighter. Someone tries to go along with him, offering to accompany the mission closely. But the man who was sitting down tells the tattooed guy to stay put right where he was. Looking from behind, the guy states that that problem was only in District 2. Accepting the order without complaint, the fighter lowers his head as a sign of respect. Back in the dark alley, some shoes shuffle along the ground into a combat stance. The blonde man steps forward full of rage, reminding them that he had already warned them before. And terrified, the leader listens to the threat about being severely punished very soon. The youth watches everything while remembering his adoptive father, asking why it had to be him. Standing under the street light, the imposing man thinks he wasn't able to give all the answers. Boiling with hatred, the protective father yells that the idiot boy was actually his son. Giving a confident smile, the student realizes that this was the biggest reason of all. Stepping over the fallen henchman, the man argues that he was just a child. With an intimidating posture, he tells the thug to show some shame and stop with that. Furious, the mobster complains about that nonsense talk, saying there are no children in their world. Grinding his teeth in anger, the protective father snaps back, telling the idiot to wake up to reality. And throwing a lightning-fast punch, he warns that trash will always be treated like absolute trash. The gang leader manages to dodge the blow by throwing his body back and insulting his rival. Observing the failed attack, the big man changes his mind about what part of the enemy he was going to hurt. Preparing another punch, he guarantees he will rip the mobster's ears off without a second thought. Blinded by hatred, the thug's boss charges forward with everything, preparing a blow with his maximum strength. At that, the villain lands a powerful impact right on the boy's father's chest, making him back up. Glaring at his rival up close, the boss shows he is not playing around in that night battle. Even while taking the attack, the father's legs stay firm on the ground, showing his endurance. And firing back in kind, the big guy smashes his opponent's face with a very heavy punch. The mobster's eye widens, feeling all the extreme pain of that brutal counterattack. Without giving a chance for defense, the father unleashes an incredibly fast sequence of punches on the enemy. Giving a dark smirk in the shadows, he shows he is thoroughly enjoying beating up the trash. Filled with fear, the leader tries to strike back, complaining about being demoted because of him. But the big guy is faster and lands a devastating blow right in the thug's chest, stopping him cold. The villain's face completely contorts, suffering massive damage from that destructive impact. Capitalizing on the opening, the hero unleashes a powerful uppercut coming from below to finish the job. The clenched fist hits exactly under the mobster's chin with terrifying force. Droplets fly everywhere as the boss's head is snapped back by the absurd shock. Completely disoriented, the thug stumbles backward, nearly losing his balance for good. And showing no mercy, the protective father lunges forward again, delivering another heavy punch through the air. The attack hits the enemy's face dead center, creating a shockwave through the dark alley. Watching everything up close, the youth stands impressed by his adoptive father's brutal strength. The mobster stares at the sky with a blank look, showing he can no longer fight properly. With his red eye glowing, the protagonist keeps analyzing every single move of that brawl. Then, the father unleashes a destructive spinning punch, sending the thug's body flying away. The defeated man's shoes skid across the concrete floor, showing just how far he was dragged. Finishing the movement, the big guy watches the gang boss collapse on the ground, completely annihilated. The adoptive father and the mobster keep facing off on the street, while the thug grumbles in anger. With his face battered, the leader complains that his rival doesn't even understand the reason he was demoted. At that, the big guy just glares at the enemy in silence, his eyes glowing an intense red. Scarily calm, the fighter taunts, asking if the thug was afraid of him. Watching everything from the ground, the student follows the fight closely while listening to the mobster's yells. Full of hatred, the gang leader tears his own shirt, warning that he waited 10 years for that day. Then, he charges with everything, delivering an aggressive punch while talking about his demotion. Enveloped in the aura of a giant hammerhead shark, the villain guarantees he remains just as cruel as before. Glaring fixedly at his target, the thug concentrates all his fury to finalize that dispute. But the adoptive father blocks the attack easily and lands a crushing blow on the enemy's face. Showing his superiority, the big man just fixes his deathly red gaze on his opponent. The student is completely awestruck, seeing the true raw strength of his guardian. Totally broken, the gang leader falls backward, losing consciousness completely. The thug's body collapses onto the wet asphalt, marking the definitive end of that night combat. Standing and taking a deep breath, the victorious man observes his fallen rival, showing who really rules. He then kneels down and grabs the battered man's ear, remembering the warning he had given before. With a dark look, He pulls the mobster's ear hard to fulfill the promise he made. The thug opens his eyes wide and screams in desperation, feeling unbearable pain at that moment. A sound of something tearing echoes loudly through the empty street, ending the enemy leader's severe punishment. The strike sends a lot of blood into the air, staining the defeated man's shirt and leaving a terrible mark. Observing the scene, the youth concludes that he doesn't know the whole story, but the final outcome was very obvious. Giving a confident smile, he thinks about how the world is divided between hunters and prey. Seeing the villain's body on the ground, he notices that even the cruel hammerhead shark ended up becoming the prey there. With a focused look, the student reflects that his protector knows exactly what needs to be done. Spitting on the ground, the big man shows that he not only keeps his promises, but leaves a permanent mark. The boy realizes that the unfolding of that fight didn't matter, because the end had already been decided beforehand. Walking calmly through the shadows, the victorious father demonstrates his unique way of settling things. He then extends his heavy hand, proving he truly deserves to be at the top of that world. Filled with admiration, the youth is absolutely certain that that strong man could go until the very end of everything. With his face dirty, the big guy questions what the boy is doing and tells him to just grab his hand already. The student firmly holds his father's hand while hearing a complaint about staring too much. Now on his feet, the boy looks away, warning that the man's face was all dirty because of the fight. The veteran wipes the dirt from his chin, asking if it was good, but the boy says that it looked bad. The big guy turns his back, wanting to head home, but the youth asks him to wait a moment. Without paying much mind, the fighter warns he is heading out ahead and tells the boy to walk back alone later. Ignoring the warning, the student bends down near the fallen mobster and starts picking something up from the ground. With a dark expression, the young man collects the proof of that victory without showing any disgust. The setting changes to a bright room where someone asks if the youth went there just to collect a debt. In a safe location, the student faces his adoptive father, who relaxes on the couch, demanding explanations from him. Scratching the back of his neck, the man grumbles irritably, wanting to know why kids nowadays are so bold. The veteran sighs in confusion, wondering if the kid was just a lunatic or someone incredibly smart. With a serious look, he reflects that the best option would be to toss that troublesome boy aside. But the protagonist cuts off the older man's thoughts, telling him not to overthink it. With great calmness, the boy states that he simply fulfilled a promise, exactly as he had said. The big guy praises the response and comments about the defeated mobster heading back to the main headquarters. Suggesting a new path, the father tells the young man to give up on the underworld and go back to studying soon. He argues that in District 1, there would surely be at least some school willing to accept him. Without hesitating for even a second, the youth refuses the offer, questioning the reason to do something like that. At that, the boy puts his hand inside his coat pocket, letting him know he had brought a little something. Showing the mark of victory, he argues that he brought a piece of the enemy, fulfilling the agreement made. Hearing that clever excuse, the older man gives a slight smirk, looking rather proud. Clenching his fist, the protagonist states that now he is part of the gang as a legitimate son. The big guy lowers his head, shaking his hair strands while laughing quietly at the kid's audacity. Becoming serious again, the leader scratches his eye intrigued and asks what his true intention was. In the large empty room, the tension rises as the veteran insists on knowing the young man's motives. The man presses him, wanting to understand why he wants so badly to be a criminal, and specifically his son. Facing his new father, the boy maintains a firm posture and confesses that he has only two goals. In a dark tone, he reveals that the first step is to destroy every single filthy thug that exists. Furthermore, he guarantees he will drag everyone down to rock bottom. And with a slight smile, the protagonist finishes by saying he will pursue this vengeance at any cost. The youth states with great conviction that he will place his new adoptive father at the very top of everything. Facing the veteran up close, the boy reveals that this is his next primary goal. Outside, we see the tattooed man leaning calmly against a heavily stained metal door. The student opens the door slightly and gets confused seeing the henchman standing right there in the hallway. With a calm expression, the fighter simply tells the boy to come with him at that exact instant. The two then walk together in silence through the night, observing the large, lit-up city. Walking through the alley, the youth questions if they were heading back to the riverbank again. At that, the two end up stopping in front of a small convenience store that was open. The man hands a blue popsicle to the boy, wanting to know the reason for that sudden attitude. Holding the sweet, the student asks if he was talking about the fact that he wants to join the gang. He explains that it wasn't out of nowhere. and that his life was already decided right from the start. Biting the popsicle, the youth regrets that no matter his effort, he will always end up right back there. Hearing those heavy words, the big fighter just glares at the young man with a serious look. He then suggests that the youth train in broad daylight, unless he has a reason not to do so. Patting the boy, the henchman states clearly that he has a great talent for fighting. The boy is surprised to hear the older man saying that he still has a real chance to change. With a smile, the fighter tells him to stop talking nonsense and leave the problems to the adults. But the student completely changes his expression, warning that things are no longer like that. With red eyes, he states that nothing will change unless he handles everything with his own hands. Focused, the youth remembers his father saying he didn't teach him to fight, just to use so much violence. Turning his face, the boy grumbles quietly that he is already very well aware of all that. Holding the sweet, he states that his new father's plan is also just a simple revenge. Taking a very aggressive bite out of the popsicle, the protagonist guarantees that he will do the same. The tattooed big guy just turns his back and observes the night sky in total silence. The student points to himself with absolute certainty, guaranteeing he will seek his vengeance. Near the store, the fighter lets him know that the order from the high command has already been sent for them to follow. The henchman looks over his shoulder, mentioning the name of the great leader and protector of that place. At that moment, we see a pair of hands crushing the popsicle wrapper with enormous force. And shortly after, the crumpled paper is thrown directly into the trash can along with other things. Back at the hideout, the adoptive father hears a noise at the door and asks who was there. The tattooed man enters, bowing his head, while the boss asks if the boy went home. Walking across the room, the fighter confirms that the boy reached his destination safely. The veteran leans forward, commenting that things with the boy ended up that way. Sitting on the couch, he looks at his henchman and asks why he agreed with that idea. With a very serious face, the leader adds, noting that the boy wouldn't end up becoming his son after all. The henchman opens his eyes wide and reveals that the student wants to go after the main villain all by himself. At that, the big guy raises his finger, pointing at something, and highlights another very important point. The camera pans away, showing the piece of the enemy that the boy ripped off lying right there on the floor. The henchman understands that the boy used the deal as pressure, and the boss questions what choice he had. The adoptive father cracks his neck and simply concludes that that was exactly how the mess went down. The man in the blue shirt faces his boss, saying he understands the situation perfectly. With a very steady gaze, the fighter mentions that the part about the boy becoming an adopted son was also serious. The gang leader looks ahead, appearing quite bothered by all that tense talk. Standing in the illuminated room, the tattooed man questions how their plan was going to look from there on. The big guy slams his fist with massive force on the table, guaranteeing that nothing would change in the strategies. With red eyes, the leader explains that now, with the enemy injured, they are only going to move faster. Elsewhere, the student walks alone, climbing the street staircases while letting out a heavy sigh. Giving a very slight smirk, the young man recognizes that his new father is an impressive guy. The scene cuts back to the hideout, where the leader repeats the words about being placed at the top of everything. The boy keeps walking and confirms in his thoughts that this is his next big target. The veteran questions if the boy thinks he can get what he wants without having to lift a single finger. With a very confident smile, the youth states that it is quite obvious things don't work that way. And surprised, the mobster remembers the boy's promise about him becoming his father starting today. Focused on his goal, the student asks himself mentally if he was wrong to make that decision. The big guy lowers his head, sighing, and grumbles that this isn't the kind of thing to decide easily. He explains that a child is everything in life, and no matter how much you give, it always seems to be too little. Walking in the dark, the youth thinks that his real parents must have felt that way too. Showing the side profile of the leader's face, he asks if his new partner was truly on board. The boy stares at the ground, guaranteeing that it is for this exact reason that he will take on the family name. With his eyes glowing, he remembers that because of him, the leader faced the enemy after 10 years. The bearded veteran lowers his gaze, admitting that that attitude from the boy was quite impressive. Facing the youth with a light smile, the big guy agrees, saying that that was already enough. At that, the two stand face to face, ready to seal the new deal that would change everything there. Placing his heavy hand on the student's head, the leader accepts the request, telling them to begin. The youth lowers his thoughtful gaze, while the boss explains that adopting someone is a rather difficult thing. Arriving home during the night, the boy wonders mentally how he was going to explain all of that. Suddenly, A girl comes out through the gate in a panic, wanting to know what kind of crazy story that was. Startled, the student turns his head and stammers upon seeing the young woman standing right there. With her arms crossed, she demands answers about him wanting to become the adopted son of a mobster. Breaking into a cold sweat, the young man realizes that she ended up overhearing the entire conversation he had earlier. Without giving him space, the young woman keeps pressing to know what happened after the whole fight. With a very attentive look, she asks directly if things turned out the way he wanted. Scratching the back of his neck awkwardly, the student looks away and agrees that in the end, everything worked out. The girl turns her back in relief, mentioning that it's the first time he does what he actually wants. Walking toward the house entrance, she calls out to the young man, telling him to come inside right away to eat something. Surprised by her calm attitude, the youth blinks in confusion upon hearing that she hadn't had dinner yet. Giving a light smile, the boy thanks her for the concern and decides to follow the young woman inside. The camera focuses on the small, lit-up house, showing that the night was only just beginning around there. The setting changes to a closed room where the entire gang is gathered for a serious meeting. One of the henchmen comments, looking to the side, that the boy's presence made the atmosphere quite strange. Leaning back on the couch, the big guy warns that there's no way around it and they'll just have to get used to him. With a sharp gaze, the boss faces the young man, asking if he settled all his loose ends. The student agrees, saying there wasn't much to do since the enemy already knew everything. Satisfied with the answer, the veteran asks to hear the boy's reasons for seeking shelter there. Facing his new father, the youth states he thought of the fastest path to their success. But the leader shakes his head, rejecting the idea, because that rushed plan wouldn't work out well. He explains that in big plans, the most important thing must always be the safety of the crew. Pointing to his chest, the man guarantees he wouldn't accept a plan where anyone from their side got hurt. Hearing the scolding, the young man focuses on the ground while the leader tells him to rethink his strategies. Firmly, the big guy decides they don't need to rush and will proceed with the original cleanup plan. Agreeing with the boss's order, the henchman in the light-colored shirt lowers his head, getting the message. At that exact moment, the hideout door is violently kicked open, startling everyone inside. Quickly, the mobsters stand up to fight while one of them pulls the student back. At the entrance, we see a pack of enemy henchmen armed with wooden clubs invading the place. Without wasting time, one of the allies leaps toward the invaders, starting the massive clash right there. Running at high speed, the blue-haired henchman shows all his fury against the rivals. With grit teeth, he curses the intruders, demonstrating that he won't show mercy to a single one of them. Seeing that man's speed, the invaders open their eyes wide in shock, unable to react. Delivering a perfect leap, the fighter lands a devastating kick right on the first enemy's face. The force of the blow is so immense that the invader flies backward, knocking down his own allies. With his eyes glowing red, the henchman prepares a cross-punch filled with absolute, pure hatred. An enemy tries to strike with a club, but the ally blocks the blow using only his bare arm. At that, he uses his other leg and lands a solid kick right in the attacker's stomach, throwing him far away. Spinning his body with great agility, the fighter dodges several attacks at the same time without breaking a sweat. Capitalizing on the opening, he lands a straight punch to the face of another enemy, who drops defenseless. Sliding his foot on the ground, the ally executes a heavy sweep, taking down another target easily. As the rival was falling, the blue-haired man raises his knee and finishes off the poor guy without delay. The invader's body hits the floor while the fighter maintains his stylish pose, proving his strength. Still full of energy, the henchman turns his head and spots another target ready to take a heavy beating. The man in the suit breaks into a cold sweat and opens his eyes wide, realizing his downfall was coming fast. Without hesitating, the ally connects a heavy punch right on the mobster's cheek, crumpling his face. The impact is brutal, and the enemy flips onto the warehouse floor, getting completely knocked out instantly. Observing all that chaos from afar, the boss maintains a calm posture, not caring much. Hidden behind the other ally, the boy peeks at the fight, left impressed by the gang's skill level. The last invader drops to his knees on the floor and screams desperately, begging them to stop doing that. Glaring at the scene, the big guy just raises his voice and lets his henchmen know that that was already enough. The fighter holds his fist in midair, stopping the blow just a few inches from the crying enemy's face. The blue-haired man promptly obeys the order, stating that the job there was concluded. With his hands in his pockets, the veteran grumbles that those weak guys had nothing special about them. Confused by the situation, the other ally asks the reason why the rival gang went all the way to their hideout. Fallen on the ground, the terrified mobster confesses that they also saw all of that happen. Facing the intruder, the big leader hears him say they saw their rival boss get completely defeated. With his hands in his pockets, the veteran asks if they were there seeking revenge for what went down. Trembling with fear, the henchman raises his hands, quickly denying that crazy idea. Bowing nearly to the floor, the desperate man begs for them to accept his gang into their crew. The other injured men also bow, swearing they don't belong to a large syndicate, and surrendering completely. Daring to raise an eyebrow, the bearded boss repeats those words, appearing deep in thought. At that moment, the student remembers that the first step of their plan was to take over that district. Focused, the boy explains that District 2 would fall into their hands easily after clearing the villain out of the way. But the big dad questions if the massive faction would hand over the territory in such a peaceful manner. Facing the older man up close, the youth agrees, saying the rivals would never do something like that. Quite confused by the logic, the leader asks the reason for those big shots to give up on the location. Displaying a mental map, the young man reveals that that abandoned region holds zero financial value. The veteran understands that the big shots only sent the villain there to mark their presence and control the other rivals. The protagonist adds, saying that because of this, the large faction ordered the shark to return to headquarters. Adjusting his wristband, the youth points out that now, without the shark, nobody else cares about that neighborhood. Hearing the explanation, the bearded boss agrees that for the remnants of the rival gang, only one path was left. Focused, the boy states that the idea was to give a great reason for the enemy henchmen to bow their heads. The scene cuts to the night, showing some men standing on top of a wall, looking out at the dark city. The student asked what went down when the guys saw their feared boss get defeated up close. Giving a dark smile, the youth guarantees that because of that, the rival gang had no choice but to yield. With a sharp look, he reveals his genius plan to swallow up the remnants of the gang along with the district. Seated, the young man states that if everything goes right, their first battle has already been won right there. The henchman in the light shirt stands shocked, trying to imagine what goes on in the head of a kid like this. Satisfied with his own intelligence, the boy lets out a small smile seeing that his plan worked. Silence takes over the room while the big bearded guy stares at his new son, heavily impressed. With a very serious expression, the boss analyzes that entire perfect plot twist that just went down. At the door, the enemy henchmen remain bowed, begging for mercy and promising to obey everything. Scratching the back of his neck, the leader lets out a heavy sigh, seemingly unable to believe things were so easy. His right-hand man asks quietly what their next step would be given that situation. Focused, the veteran answers that they came begging for their lives, and that there wasn't much choice now. In a firm tone, the big dad declares he will accept the guys into the family, but only under one condition. Facing the intruders, he orders them to stay in the district watching over everything, or they would be kicked out. Hearing that, the battered men thank him with lowered heads, swearing they would do their absolute best there. The boss lets them know that the leader of those invaders would now answer directly to his right-hand man. Sweating heavily, the guy understands the message and promises not to disrupt the progress of the new gang's business. Already tired of all that chaos, the bearded man waves his hand, telling everyone to go home and rest. Obeying the order, the new recruits start walking out backward, still showing immense respect for them. With a small click, the metal door finally closes, leaving the room in total silence once again. Now the camera shows the entire original group, gathered in the middle of the hideout after this sudden victory. Looking to the side, the big dad lets his trusted ally know that he would have a lot of work taking care of them. Calmly, the fighter states he will keep an eye on those idiots so they don't try any funny business. Seeing that the problem was resolved, the youth turns his face, ready to proceed with his own plans. Giving a light smile, the student highlights that everything turned out exactly how he wanted and nobody could complain anymore. The veteran just clicks his tongue, appearing a bit bothered by his boy's brilliant arrogance. The young man in the dress shirt observes the scene silently, realizing the gang was gaining a lot of strength there. Meanwhile, the blue-haired fighter just gives a thumbs up, completely approving of the new member's tactics. And with a serene look, the other member crosses his arms, accepting that the kid really is very good. At that, the muscular henchman asks the boss to simply accept the fact that the plan was a total success. Walking toward the hideout exit, the protagonist lets them know he is heading home now. Holding the handle, the student looks over his shoulder, saying he still has many things to prepare. The heavy metal door closes again, leaving the group of mobsters alone to digest the news. The setting changes to a large and luxurious hallway where a man in a suit walks with very firm steps. With a tired and sweaty face, the big guy lets out a heavy sigh, appearing exhausted from work. He clenches his teeth tightly, cursing quietly while demonstrating he is in the middle of a truly horrible day. The mobster narrows his eyes full of pure hatred, proving that his patience had already reached its limit. Stopping in front of a large wooden door, he knocks a few times, introducing himself by his name. Bowing with respect, the muscular man lets them know he came to hand in the report from his recent trip. Inside the dark room, a voice congratulates his effort, revealing there are new plans to discuss there. The big boss then asks, intrigued, what kind of urgent report he needed to deliver so badly. Bowing, the mobster in the suit reveals that the main subject of the conversation would be about District 2. With a serious face, he warns that the big bearded leader's faction was about to make a move. Meanwhile, the boy walks through the hallways, thinking about sneaking away from there very quietly. Stopping at the door, he gives a slight smirk, warning himself mentally that he has important things to prepare. Arriving in a dark alley, the youth lets out a heavy sigh, appearing quite exhausted with all of that. Focused, the student reflects that situation from a moment ago almost spun completely out of control. Clemming the staircases with his hands in his pockets, the protagonist just wants to get back home soon. At that, a voice orders them to stop, while the youth notices several battered henchmen walking down the steps. The injured men look back in confusion, wanting to know if something wrong had happened. With his back turned, the boy explains coldly that he ended up failing to deliver his primary message. Annoyed, one of the men in suits complains about that kid's audacity to talk to adults like that. Giving a mocking smile, the student taunts, saying they act exactly like ignorant garbage. Furious at the insult, the henchman yells that the youth's attitude irritates him and promises not to let it slide. Showing a very sharp look, the protagonist challenges the men to try and do something against him. Highly confident, the youth simply asks if they weren't going to lower their guard during that confrontation. Full of hatred, the man in the suit charges forward, throwing a punch and cursing the kids of that generation. With a simple movement, the student slides his body back, easily dodging the heavy attack. Capitalizing on the perfect opening, the boy lands a direct punch right in the middle of his opponent's face. The henchman collapses to the ground knocked out, while his allies stand in shock, not understanding the situation. Shaking his hand, the young man reflects mentally if they ended up hitting that strong guy's head. Stepping into a combat stance, the youth faces the enemies, asking if they don't remember him. Breaking into a cold sweat, the other mobster starts to realize that the student's face was very familiar after all. The man opens his eyes wide, deducing he could be from the first district, and gets very terrified. Falling backward, he recognizes that was the kid who always disrupted the gang's plans. Keeping the smile on his face, the protagonist notices that the henchman finally recalled his face. Trembling heavily, the invader understands the reason why the big shark took action personally against the boy. Clenching his fist, the mobster states that the boy knew too much and needed to be wiped out no matter what. Desperate, the man in the suit runs toward the young man, ready to destroy him using a lot of force. With wide eyes, the invader yells in rage, guaranteeing he wouldn't let the youth leave there alive. Without sweating, the student nimbly dodges the first attack, while the man throws his body forward. Capitalizing on the enemy's momentum, the youth lands a powerful elbow strike on the suited man's back. Right after, the protagonist connects a brutal blow right on the mobster's jaw, making him spit blood. To finish the combo perfectly, the young man lands a front kick, launching the body far away. The enemy collapses hard onto the stone floor, while hearing that he is the one who shouldn't stay alive. Showing no mercy whatsoever, the student raises his foot and stumps hard on the fallen henchman's face. The strike smashes the man's face into the floor, proving the boy was not playing around in combat. Seeing all that violence, the last mobster left standing starts sweating cold, covering his mouth in pure terror. Glaring at his target, the youth realizes that was the only thug who didn't accompany the defeated leader. Walking menacingly, the boy warns that he can't recognize the face of a single one of them anymore. Desperate, the ally explains that he doesn't get involved in the dirty work, and that the past didn't belong to them. Grabbing the man by his collar, the student states that they keep breaking the new father's rules. With a blank look, he warns that he came only to alert them not to treat his faction like weaklings. In a deadly tone, the young man guarantees that from then on, he wouldn't tolerate the presence of any kind of trash. Trembling, the enemy gets the message perfectly, promising to fix things without causing trouble. Letting go of the henchman, the youth is glad to find someone reasonable but points out he doesn't trust thugs. Giving a small, dark smile, the student warns him to stay very sharp until everything is finished. After delivering the message, the protagonist turns his back and walks away, leaving the henchman on the ground. Helping his injured friend up, the mobster reflects breathlessly that new gang possessed scary guys. With a weak voice, he orders his subordinates to clean up all that mess before anyone could see. Gathering his body from the floor, their leader states they needed to cut all ties with the old shark. The man opens his eyes wide, realizing that the boy must know about the dirty secrets the big boss hid. Sweating cold, he deduces that simple student could be orchestrating something massive in the shadows. While walking, the youth remembers that the villain used the smaller thugs to commit his heavy crimes. Focused, the boy thinks he went to give that warning, just to speed up the cleanup of that cursed neighborhood. Looking at the street from above, he states that after taking over everything, they will be able to advance with force into the next district. Reaching the top, the student trusts that his adoptive father would be planning the exact same things at the moment. At that, a noise coming from the corner of the wall catches the young man's attention, making him turn his head quickly. A suited boy with a broken nose mocks the protagonist, calling him an annoying beggar to track down. The student glares, facing the meddling newcomer, demonstrating that he didn't feel a single bit of fear. With a maniacal smile, the suited guy is revealed to be the son of the director of the major crime syndicate. The suited guy asks if it was the youth who took down a certain Uncle Choi Day. Yep, around there. The protagonist faces the newcomer with a cold and totally expressionless look on his face. Furious, the rookie complains that he had to crawl all the way there, and because of the hero, his glory days were over. With a mocking smile, the invader says that because of his eyes, the young man was going to have a very bad time. Then, the enemy swears he will disrupt the boy's life, and that he came just to warn him to watch his back. Full of hatred, the suited guy states that wherever the protagonist was, he would be ready to strike. Already out of patience, the youth slaps the rival's shoulder, telling him to simply shut his mouth. Turning his face, he cracks his neck, preparing for the combat that was about to begin. On the ground, a piece of a crumpled school uniform showing the name of the protagonist's school is displayed. Looking at the fallen paper, the young man wonders if his friend had also seen that happen. At that, the boy lets out a heavy sigh, appearing relieved that the situation didn't end up getting much worse. With a trembling hand, the student finally opens the gate door to his house, wanting nothing but to rest. He enters the courtyard stealthily so nobody notices his arrival after a very long day. Meanwhile, elsewhere, a man wonders if the protagonist's actions didn't go a bit too far. Holding a jar with a finger inside, he reflects that the owner of that item was a bit drunk. The bearded boss comments that Choi guy was demoted along with him, but was a great fighter. At the table, he explains that with the youth's exposure, there was no way the rage wouldn't turn against him. Scratching his chin, the big dad remembers that the attacker was a director's son, and that he was the one responsible. Lowering his head, he states that both he and that Choi guy would have to take responsibility. The ally places the jar into a box and asks if that was the message for that powerful guy. With a wicked look, the veteran agrees that they needed to do that to make the enemy furious. The scene cuts to the protagonist's house, showing the front of the small building during the night. Inside, a girl questions the young man if he really wanted to test himself against the gangsters. Without answering anything, the student just turns his face in silence, appearing not to want to argue. His friend then gets annoyed and asks if the boy had completely lost his mind. Worried, she reminds him that he knows very well how those large organizations destroy lives out there. With her hands together, the young woman reinforces that the home of both of them collapsed because of those thugs. The hero remains quiet while the girl says it makes no sense for him to test himself all alone. In a low voice, the protagonist reveals that his address was exposed to all the enemies. Hearing that, his friend opens her eyes wide, realizing the gravity of that dangerous situation. The young man explains that he wanted to see if he could protect someone and handle things on his own. With a focused look, he reinforces his point, saying he just wanted to test himself against them. The two keep sitting at the table in silence, while tension takes over the small room. With a sad expression, the young woman insists that even with all his strength, he couldn't do it alone. Desperate, she begs him to talk to the allies or at least find someone he can trust. The student just stares at his friend with fixed eyes, demonstrating his massive determination. Rising from his chair, he states that was something he would need to do sooner or later. Looking over his shoulder, the boy says he will take her silence as a permission to go. Totally shocked by his attitude, the young woman can only let out a small gasp of surprise. Then, the young man warns that from now on, She should also stay at their new father's house. His friend is left speechless, merely watching the youth prepare for his suicidal mission. Seen through the window, the girl starts packing her things inside a cardboard box on the floor. She picks up a crumpled piece of paper, appearing to be something important that she kept with affection. With her back turned, the young woman grumbles about her adoptive father, appearing not to like that idea very much. A small tear falls onto the wooden floor, indicating that she was crying because of the situation. The camera shows the girl from behind with her head down, looking very sad about the farewell. Outside, a man in a suit observes the protagonist's house while standing on top of a roof. His face is covered by shadows, and only his white eyes glow in the darkness of the night. The young man's friend keeps crying in her empty room, unaware that she was being watched. The mysterious man turns his back and prepares to leave after finishing his surveillance. In his thoughts, the villain praises the young man, saying he is good material to be crushed. The scene returns to the gang's hideout, showing several documents scattered across the table. The bearded boss analyzes the papers with attention, appearing to be plotting his next big move. Gathered with his trusted men, the veteran points to a specific part of a report. One of the henchmen comments that young Yun is not the type to accept things in silence. The other ally agrees but says that taking the rival henchman to the river was a major surprise. Listening to the conversation, the big dad frowns, demonstrating that he was thinking about something. With a sharp look, the leader warns his men that they need to speed up the plan a little bit. His most loyal allies face the boss with seriousness, ready to hear the new orders. The veteran explains that from that moment on, any delay would be much more dangerous for them. The big dad slams the table, stating they already sent the message and will soon have an answer from them. Then, he warns that meanwhile, the group will take advantage of the time to clean up an entire neighborhood. Worried, his right-hand man questions if they wouldn't run into trouble proceeding with that plan. The leader explains that a rolling stone cannot be stopped without causing an even greater wreck. His trusted men listen to the explanation with attention, understanding the logic behind the tactic. Clenching his fist, the veteran states that moving fast was actually the safest way to act. The scene cuts to a box glowing on top of a table in the middle of a very dark room. Inside the box, a glass jar containing a personal item is revealed as a very clear message. With his hand trembling out of rage, a man picks up the package he just received from his enemies. The man is Choi Dae-yep, a former boss who is now the proxy of disputes for the large organization. His eyes fill with pure hatred upon realizing the sheer audacity of the protagonist's gang. Clenching his teeth, he curses his rivals as lunatics for having sent something so direct. Gripping the box tightly, the mobster grumbles that movement was totally obvious. In a fit of fury, he crushes the cardboard package using only the strength of his hands. The man then hurls the glass jar far away, not caring about the consequences. With a loud noise, the glass shatters into several pieces upon hitting the floor of the place. Showing no remorse, the mobster steps on the shards, crushing what remained of that gift. Right after, he walks toward a wooden door, throwing it open abruptly. Inside, the director's son, Hwang Sung-hyuk, was standing there waiting for his father to arrive. Director Hwang Sung-ju yells at his son, asking if he can't even hold down a neighborhood. With his broken nose, the youth just glares at the floor in silence, looking ashamed. Turning his face, the young man lets his father know that the man named Choi Dae-yep was there. At that moment, the furious mobster enters the room, leaving the director's son highly terrified. The suited guy lets out a sigh of relief for no longer being the target of his powerful father's rage. The director then yells at the newcomer, asking who gave him permission to enter. Bowing with respect, the mobster apologizes for his sudden entry without warning. With a tired sigh, the big boss just asks what that man wanted in his office right now. Still bowed, the man in the suit asks to act alone for a few days to settle everything. The scene shows the mobster and the director's son standing before the grand leader seated at the desk. Suspicious, the director asks if the sudden request was because of young Kim Moo-won. His son stands shocked upon hearing the protagonist's name being mentioned in that conversation of theirs. With his injured ear, the mobster confirms that he was invited into that whole situation. The big boss narrows his eyes, realizing there was something highly suspicious going on there. Joining his hands, he reflects on how strange that coincidence of recent events was. With a clenched fist, the director decides that he himself will take care of that situation personally. He tells the mobster not to let the enemy enjoy themselves, and to focus on what he was already preparing. The man in the suit just agrees with the order, backing away so as not to irritate the big boss further. In profile, the subordinate demonstrates being quite tense with all that complicated situation. He then turns around and leaves the room, closing the door to leave the director alone with his son. Left alone, the man reflects that he can use the boy to take the credit at the right time without any issues. With a serious look, the mobster appears to be thinking about his next move against the rivals. Kneeling, he decides that it is still not the right time to interfere directly in the situation. Looking at his phone, he states that he will only step onto the stage when it is truly worth it. The scene cuts quickly, showing the name of a labor company on a blue screen. The setting changes to a residential neighborhood during the night with the city lights in the background. An old cell phone is tossed down the stairs, falling step by step until it reaches the ground. The device stops rolling next to a pole and some leftover food dumped right there. Shortly after, the protagonist appears walking alone through a dark and silent alley. Looking at a crumpled piece of paper, he confirms that he finally arrived at the location he was searching for. With his back turned, the youth walks toward a blue gate, which was his primary objective. Standing in front of a large metal door, the student stares at the hideout's entrance. In his thoughts, he mocks them, saying that his targets chose a great place to hide themselves. Wearing a black mask, the boy peeks over a wall to analyze the entire perimeter. With slow and careful steps, the young man finally enters the courtyard of his enemy's house. Turning his face, he demonstrates being totally focused on his mission to finish off the thugs. From behind, the youth hears a voice on the other end of the line telling the boss not to worry. On the phone, a muscular man warns that he already moved all the merchandise and that only he remained. He explains that as soon as his partner arrives, he will finish everything, but a punk didn't want to listen. The masked youth then smashes the glass door, thinking that he would never find that house alone. With his red eyes, he taunts, saying that for someone who sells people, the guy lives very poorly. Confused by the strange voice on the phone, the muscular man lets out a sound of doubt. Lowering the cell phone, he recognizes his visitor and realizes that things got complicated right there. Rising to his feet, the thug complains that if the youth was going to start something, he should have shown up sooner. Giving a mocking smile, the man in the tank top extends his hand to greet the boy. He then remembers that the two of them had already met before, and that the situation wasn't new. The hero states that the information was correct, and that his father's gang was more useful than he thought. Shocked, the young man realizes that the enemy was expecting him, and that now he had more things to confirm. With wide eyes, he wonders if his planted spy ended up leaking his identity. Furious, the man in the tank top charges forward, throwing a punch and cursing the kid for acting that way. The youth dodges the blow, thinking that putting aside his spy, nobody should know about him there. The enemy attacks again, revealing that he sensed something strange happening behind the scenes. Giving a victorious smile, the thug strikes the young man's face and thanks him for coming. Sweeting a little, he guarantees that that was exactly what he was looking for at the moment. With a powerful strike, the man hits the protagonist's chin, seemingly finishing the fight. The youth bends backward, absorbing the impact of the heavy punch he received from his enemy. But in reality, he blocks the attack with his forearm, making the rival's fist tremble. Upon impact, the man spits instantly, feeling immense pain in his hand after the block. Capitalizing on the opening, the student lands a brutal punch right in the middle of his opponent's belly. The man in the tank top backs away, feeling the agony of the blow and cursing the strength of that simple boy. Desperate, he leans against a table so he doesn't fall and tries to think of a way to strike back. Grabbing a glass bottle, the thug prepares to use a dirty weapon against the young man. He then attacks, yelling that everyone loses their minds because of things from the past. The protagonist easily dodges the blow, causing the bottle to shatter against the wall behind him. Without losing time, the boy advances and tackles his enemy's body to bring him down to the floor. But the man manages to get on top and starts punching the youth, asking if he thinks he's strong. Landing a punch on the face, he yells that that side is no place for a useless punk. He continues the sequence of blows, saying they already used the boy to fill a void. With hatred in his eyes, the thug asks what the youth had said about selling people earlier. Then, he promises to cut the young man into small pieces and sell him too as revenge. The villain connects another powerful blow, right in the middle of the protagonist's face on the floor. But the man screams in pain as his fist gets caught by the student, who stops the final attack. With massive strength, the youth grabs his enemy's clothes and prepares to turn the tables. In a swift movement, he throws the thug's body to the side and takes absolute control of the fight. Now on top, the protagonist begins his own sequence of brutal punches without an ounce of mercy. Now with a clenched fist, he rains it down with speed toward the enemy's face. The blow hits the tank top man's jaw dead center, making a sharp and terrifying thud. Without stopping, the young man continues his beating, crushing the villain's face with very heavy punches. Fallen on the floor, the thug stares at the ceiling while hearing that the boy has one more question. The student questions if someone of his level is at least as good as the big boss's fingernail. With wide eyes, the man wonders what that kid thinks he is doing there. With his face battered, he hopes that the enemy isn't the type who overestimates himself too much. Rising to his feet, the young man warns that he has one last question to ask right there before leaving. Fallen on the floor, the man hears the question about where the children were sent by them. With a bloody face, the thug mocks the young man and his soft attitude of wanting to save people. At that moment, the student picks up the broken bottleneck that was on the floor of the place. Walking toward the enemy, the youth repeats the word "attitude" in a mocking tone. Without a second thought, he swings the broken bottle, ready to strike the fallen man. With a brutal strike, the youth hits the thug, who screams desperately in pure pain on the floor. With an insane look, the young man asks if that kind of determination was enough. Standing over the injured man, he orders the enemy to answer his question immediately. Out of patience, the young man stomps hard on the man's leg to make him speak up once and for all. With a deadly look, the boy demands that the thug answer his question right now. The youth finally hears the answer, that the children went to the Daekyung branch. At that, the director's son appears by surprise and asks if he knows how to get there. With a cold voice, the student simply tells the man on the ground to do exactly what he is told. Losing his patience, the young man demands that his enemy immediately answer his previous question. The boy is surprised when he hears the answer about the location of that Daekyung branch. Then, the director's son mocks the boy, asking if he can even get there on his own. Annoyed, the man in the suit grabs the protagonist from behind and yells, repeating his question. He tries to pin the young man down, but ends up getting the worst of it from a lightning-fast counterattack. The student lands a powerful elbow strike, right in the middle of his new enemy's stomach. With the impact, the director's son instantly gags, feeling an immense pain in his stomach. Taking advantage of the opening, the boy shoves his opponent's body away and gets ready to strike. In one swift move, he grabs his rival's face and pulls him closer without hesitation. The student then connects a brutal knee strike right in the middle of the director's son's face. The blow lands perfectly, and the sound of the impact echoes through their abandoned warehouse. Holding the injured man by the head, the young man keeps him from falling unconscious to the ground. He uses the position to land another powerful punch on his rival's already bruised face. The man in the suit is thrown backward by the force of the blow, nearly passing out completely from the pain. With his body going limp, he finally collapses to the ground, no longer having the strength to keep fighting. Standing over the fallen body, the protagonist calls the man by the name of Gwang-sik. With a deadly look, he asks if the enemy still hasn't figured out that things are different here. Pulling the man by his collar, he warns him that there is no one around to help him in this place. The student lifts his rival up and reminds him that the reason he survived in the past wasn't by accident. With his eyes glowing, he reveals that he didn't finish him off because he chose to spare him himself. With his back turned, the protagonist wipes the blood off his arm, looking completely exhausted from that fight. With eyes full of hatred, he glares at the fallen enemies on the floor of that small place. The young man kicks the other henchman and says that, in the end, they all say the exact same thing. The scene cuts to a man on a rooftop, appearing to be hiding from someone up there. He turns on a hose and starts washing his hands, which were covered in something dark. With a tired face, the young man stares at the city during the night and lets out a heavy sigh. Angrily, he curses the city's criminals for doing so many awful things out there. He then picks up his phone to check his messages and sees that there is something very strange on it. With tears in his eyes, the young man seems to be suffering from a recent loss in his life. On his phone screen, he sees that he has 10 missed calls and 1 new message to read. Startled, he wonders what on earth happened in such a short amount of time for all of this to go down. With a dark expression and glowing eyes, the young man grows furious over what happened. The message says that the girl, Ah-yun, went missing, and it was sent by someone named Hansong Jae. Back to the fight, the student says he has been prepared for the worst ever since he chose this path. With a look of pure hatred, the young man glares at his rival and asks if he really thought he would just do nothing. The boy then forces his enemy's mouth open to teach the spoiled kid a lesson. With a brutal punch, he shows that he isn't playing around and that he is going to end it all. The protagonist continues his sequence of strikes, leaving his rival completely unable to react. He then asks if the enemy wants to live to see tomorrow after everything he did. With a wicked smile, the young man warns him that if he wants that, his rival will have to pay for his life. The student explains that he is talking about the life the other guy left in the hands of that Choi Dae. Yeah, out of patience, he complains that he doesn't understand how his rival is so foolish and still managed to get this far. The boy demands a piece of information that would make that Choi guy completely ruin him if he ever found out. Terrified, the director's son begins to shake with fear, realizing his life is on the line. The protagonist throws his body to the ground and asks if he is more afraid of his distant boss. Lying on the ground, the man in the suit shakes his head and says he will tell the young man what he wants to know. He reveals that the handsome boys were sold for a high price to certain places. Furious, the student steps on the man's head and asks if he really sold those boys. The rival confirms the information and says that the best-looking boys were worth a lot more money. He goes on to say that the ones who weren't useful were sent to the branches of the Dakian company. With this new information, the boy gets even angrier and gets ready to strike. In his eyes, you can see the flame of pure hatred burning, without stopping for even a single second. With his face completely bruised, the director's son begins to laugh in a totally insane way. Laughing, he just mumbles about how his life had turned into one big joke. At that moment, the other henchman stands up and tells his partner to shut his mouth once and for all. He warns his friend that if he is going to go down, he should at least go down alone right there. The man in the tank top tries to stop his companion from saying anything else to our hero, but the protagonist just lets out a tired sigh, looking completely annoyed by everything. Turning to the henchman, the young man warns him that if one broken leg wasn't enough, he can make things much worse. He warns the man that even without his crying, it would soon be his turn to get a beating anyway. With a bruised face, the enemy questions what the young man is truly capable of doing against him. Then, the criminal yells that now that his partner is out of the picture, only he knows the truth, and he dares the boy. The henchman says the student came looking for information, but that he wasn't an easy target. He complains that the young man underestimates him just because he cleans up the mess for a powerful guy. With his mask on, the hero asks if the man isn't going to let him go and what he plans to do about it. Out of patience, the boy slams his rival's head against the ground with an absurd amount of force. The man in the tank top lets out a desperate cry of pain, feeling the impact of the brutal strike. The protagonist continues his sequence of attacks, smashing his enemy's face into the ground. Desperate, the criminal begs the student to stop the beating before he loses consciousness. With a cold gaze, the young man stares at the man lying on the ground, showing absolutely no mercy. The scene shows the ceiling of the place, indicating that the henchman was thrown with extreme violence. Suddenly, the protagonist looks up, seeming to have heard something approaching. He grabs the man's face and demands to know the name of that labor company of theirs. The criminal reveals that it is the boss's secret team, and that he doesn't know anything else. With eyes full of rage, the young man stares down at the man who is begging him to spare his life. The boy then asks about the places where the handsome boys were sold by them. The henchman answers that it was in District 4, and besides that, he knows absolutely nothing else. In a quick scene, a man is seen carrying a briefcase in a very remote area. The enemy swears that is all he knows and begs the young man to spare his life once more. The hero gives the man a little pat on the back, and the man thanks him, promising to serve him forever. Right after, the protagonist runs out of the place at high speed, looking like he is in a massive hurry. He arrives at his building and runs up the stairs, extremely worried about something. With quick steps, the boy finally reaches the door of his small apartment there. Inside, the room is a total mess, with cardboard boxes and clothes scattered all over the floor. Upon entering the bedroom, the young man is completely shocked by what he finds in there. In a flashback, he remembers telling his friend to stay at their new father's house. In the memory, the girl asks if he can't reconsider his decision to go all by himself. She says that, if they can just hold on a little longer, they will soon be adults and everything will get better. The young girl confesses that she was terrified of everything that was happening to them. The boy replies that he was doing exactly that so she wouldn't have to be afraid anymore. With tears in her eyes, the girl just stares at her friend, not knowing what to say to him. She then calls him an idiot for wanting to take such a risk all on his own. Back in the present, the protagonist clenches his fist with an immense amount of anger over the situation. He remembers telling her not to worry, and now he was completely desperate. At that moment, a man in dress shoes appears at the door of the young man's apartment. The newcomer was the adoptive father of the two, who was there to help the young man. The older man asks if the young man was there, and he nods in confirmation. The ally explains that since he lives nearby, he came ahead, but it seems like something went wrong. He warns that someone saw a group of suspicious men passing through here earlier. The father figure wonders why they would take the girl if she wasn't the real target. With a focused gaze, the protagonist seems to already have an idea of what was going on. In his mind, the masked young man states that they need to look for that rival company. Confused by the name, the veteran grabs a bottle of water and asks about the place. Standing in the middle of the messy room, the man still didn't understand the connection to any of it. He then asks what that strange place has to do with the girl's disappearance. The student takes the bottle from his ally's hand and says that the two cases don't connect. With a sharp look, the boy stares at his older partner, ready to explain. He reveals that, in reality, all of this was directly connected to himself. The young man explains that it is a secret team, and the father figure asks if it was the guys from the neighborhood. Drinking the water, the boy says they can't simply take their word for it. The veteran asks if the boy is all right, and if he didn't get beaten up by anyone on the way. The protagonist replies that they weren't a big deal, and the ally is surprised by the plural. The older man agrees that the priority right now was to find their friend first. The boy explains that the company is their best bet, because of the visit from the director's son. Hearing the explanation, the father figure agrees that the information made a lot of sense. In his thoughts, the veteran realizes that the young man is at his breaking point because of his friend. He reflects that the smartest move would be to back off, but the information was just too good. The ally then places his hand on the boy's shoulder and tells him to contact the team leader. The student questions who is going to follow the suspects, and the father figure reveals the name of the chosen one. On the phone, the father figure tells the boss that the young man is back and seems to be fine without any injuries. Surprised, he listens to the response on the other end of the line and asks if they found the enemies. Inside a car, the bearded boss confirms that his spy just called and saw the word Daram. He explains that the only place with that name around there was that labor company of theirs. The leader then tells his ally to hold the boy back so he doesn't do anything foolish. Hanging up the phone, the veteran lights a cigarette, looking completely focused on his mission. With the company name in his head, the bearded man prepares to take action against their rivals. In his thoughts, he complains that the enemies bothered him and have now caused real trouble. A car then brakes abruptly in front of a man who is standing on the sidewalk. The boss gets out of the vehicle and meets his subordinate, who was waiting for him at the agreed location. Tired, the spy complains about his boss's presence, appearing not to care much for the visit. The team leader just stares at his trusted man with a serious and sharp look. On the ground, two men in construction uniforms were lying down, appearing to be unconscious. The veteran explains that since they were the only ones who left the office, he took some precautions. The two allies observe the location, while a car drives away in the background of the dark street. The spy asks about the girl, but the boss says the men knew almost nothing. With a frustrated look, the leader realizes that someone must have hired those guys. He then tells his trusted man to come with him to a law office nearby. The ally says they need to find out if this was the work of the man who is missing a body part. The scene cuts to the protagonist's friend tied to a chair in a dark warehouse. With a defiant look, the young girl glares at her captors without showing a single shred of fear. A man with a dark expression asks if she is being quiet because she is foolish and doesn't understand. He then questions if she actually had the nerve to look at him like that. The villain steps closer and says she must have someone she trusts to be acting so calm. Grabbing the girl's hair, he warns her that things are not going to go the way she planned. With a sick smile, the criminal complains that holding himself back was driving him crazy. He says that a pretty girl like her doesn't show up very often for him to have some fun with. Pulling her hair, the villain complains that she wasn't even meant for him, and the young girl struggles. Wearing a black mask, he asks if she was trying to buy time with all of that. Looking at his watch, the man warns her that they are professionals, and they do everything cleanly. Giving a mocking smile, the masked man comments on how the time was already ticking away. Standing behind the chair, he begins a countdown to make the young girl tense. In a calm voice, the villain continues his countdown slowly to build up the suspense. Upon reaching 3, the girl's eyes widen, realizing that something is about to happen. The criminal predicts that the door is going to open and someone will announce that the car has arrived. He then picks up a piece of black cloth, preparing to cover the tied-up girl's face. Placing the cloth over her head, the villain asks if he didn't hit the nail right on the head with his prediction. With a wicked smile, the masked man warns her that she is now heading to the Dakian company. Back at the apartment, the father figure is completely shocked by what he sees at the door of the place. The protagonist is also startled and asks why on earth those guys were there. In front of the two, a group of 4 men armed with batons was blocking the way. One of them warns that they were sent to watch the scene very closely. With a sinister smile, the man tells the 2 of them to get out of the room quickly right now. With slow steps, a mysterious person enters the room, casting a large shadow across the floor. Right behind the bearded man, the gray-haired youth appears with a very serious and focused expression. Looking around the room, the veteran remarks that while it is a mess outside, it is clean inside. With that, the 2 enter the room where 4 criminals are drinking, and the older man kicks a can on the floor. Surprised, one of the troublemakers stands up and says the building is way too big for just 4 people. Looking very tired, the bearded man lets out a heavy sigh before taking action against them. With his eyes glowing with anger, he glares at the group and asks where the boy he is looking for is. Annoyed, a young man in a gray sweatshirt holds a bottle and yells, asking who they think they are. Without thinking twice, the troublemaker furiously throws the green object toward the newcomers. But the experienced fighter does not even blink and keeps glaring at the enemy with an absolute look of steel. In an extremely fast move, the hero's ally dodges the attack with absolutely no trouble. As the bottle shatters against the wall, the gray-haired young man prepares to strike back. The attacker tries to land another blow, but is startled by his opponent's unbelievable speed. Holding another bottle, the young hero mocks them, saying he is not going to make things easy for them. With his eyes glowing a sinister shade of red, he charges forward like lightning to start the fight. Running toward the enemy, the young man prepares to hit him hard using the object in his hand. The criminal's eyes widen in terror, as he realizes he will not have time to defend against that rush. With a heavy blow, the glass bottle breaks right over the first opponent's head. With that, the first henchman collapses to the floor, while another tries to use a piece of wood to attack. With quick and precise steps, the young hero spins low to the ground to dodge the new attack. Moving like a shadow, the young man takes down another opponent with a perfectly aimed, powerful kick. One of the hurt henchmen grits his teeth, in pure anger seeing his friends defeated like this. The bully tries to land a heavy punch, but the protagonist ducks with extreme agility mid-air. Taking advantage of the opening, he lands a brutal punch right in the middle of the careless enemy's stomach. Next, the hero lands a powerful uppercut that sends the opponent backward, completely dazed. Desperate, the last henchman left standing grabs a broken bottle from the floor to defend himself. Shouting in terror, he charges at the young hero, trying to strike him any way he can. But the young man dodges by quickly crouching and sweeps the criminal's legs with extreme ease. Rising with full force, the hero delivers an upward punch, hitting his rival's chin dead center. The impact is so strong that the troublemaker gasps instantly and his body is thrown violently backward. He falls unconscious while the last man left hesitates, trembling with fear, holding his club. Even though he is terrified, the guy in the brown jacket raises his piece of wood to attempt one last attack. He brings down a vertical strike, but the gray-haired young man manages to block the attack using his arm. Quickly, the hero ducks to escape a second spinning strike thrown by his opponent. Closing the distance, the gray-haired youth gets face to face with his rival and prepares his fist. With a devastating punch, he strikes the jacket, wearing enemy's face, knocking him completely out cold. The bearded veteran just watches the end of the confrontation, maintaining a completely calm and cool posture. He then points to the henchman, who is still conscious, and orders the young man to leave him alone. Stopping his fist in mid-air, the young man asks what he should do with the criminal left on the ground. Without caring much, the bearded man tells him to do whatever he wants, and the youth finishes off the last opponent. Walking calmly, the older man approaches the only troublemaker who is still awake there. Crouching down in front of the guy, he asks seriously where the people he is looking for are. The startled troublemaker stammers, saying his group was only tasked with watching that place. With narrowed eyes, the veteran asks if their boss is the terrible Choi Dae-yeop. The hurt henchman begins to sweat in terror and tries to deny the information to protect his superior. At that moment, the bearded man's hand picks up one of the broken glass bottles lying on the ground. With a scary look, he repeats the question about the boss's name while holding the sharp object. Desperate under the threat, the criminal starts yelling, confirming everything the man wanted to know. Letting out a long sigh, the veteran realizes that things are going to be much harder than he thought. Recalling past confrontations, he wonders if the group acted the same way when they moved neighborhoods. With the bottle in hand, the man asks if they were the ones who took them in, and the startled enemy quickly denies it all. Trembling, he explains that they only signed up for this specific job and that the main group must know the details. With that, the veteran fixes his glare full of anger and demands to know where this entire troublesome crew went. Completely terrified, the troublemaker breaks into a cold sweat as he realizes his situation is getting worse fast. He then reveals that the criminals went to another district to carry out a terrible forced eviction. Looking down, the injured young man regrets his own luck for getting mixed up in such a huge problem. Slowly, the experienced fighter stands up, leaving the hurt opponent behind while planning his next move. In a calm tone, he calls his partner by name to give the next orders in that messy warehouse. The gray-haired young man begins dragging one of the fallen bodies and hears the command to clean up the place quickly. In the dead of night, another criminal smiles wickedly, commenting on the orders to watch the area. Showing immense arrogance, the man whispers that it is best for everyone to get out of there as fast as possible. Suddenly, several henchmen run desperately around the building as they try to surround the new intruders. The blonde guy remarks maliciously that they cannot hurt the main target because they need him completely alive. Meanwhile, the hooded young man prepares for battle, and his master in the trench coat puts on his black gloves. But the blonde guy's smile vanishes when a huge, muscular, tattooed arm grabs him from behind. The criminal's eyes fill with absolute shock as he realizes he was caught by surprise by someone strong. With a crushing grip, the giant restrains the troublemaker, who tries to break free desperately without any success. Startled, the other lookout shouts angrily, trying to find out who the intruder is that attacked his companion. Without mercy, the big man throws the subdued man to the cold floor, taking him completely out of the fight at once. Standing firm, the strong warrior faces the other enemies and complains that they took a long time to get there. Adjusting his gloves, the young man in the trench coat warns that now they are going to pay for this delay with a lot of physical pain. Hearing the threat, a masked henchman runs furiously toward them, ready to start a new battle. Focusing his look of hatred, the attacker charges at high speed, having no idea of the danger awaiting him there. But in a fraction of a second, the troublemaker's eyes widen as he sees the overwhelming counter-attack appear. With ease, the muscular ally slams the opponent against the ground, leaving him completely dazed. Seeing that brutal scene, the man in the baseball cap mutters that the legends about the group are actually true. Without giving them time to complain, the giant delivers a devastating punch that sends the lookout straight to the ground. The hooded young man watches everything, impressed by the devastating level of strength their allies possess there. Walking firmly, the young man approaches the big guy to plan the next step of the investigation. With his eyes glowing a reddish tone, the tattooed warrior keeps his expression completely focused. Next, he connects another incredible punch, knocking down one more intrusive henchman who tried to approach. With the impact of the blow, the last opponent's body is thrown far away while dust rises around them. Watching the fallen bodies, the young man wonders why they sent so many henchmen to that house. The ally in the trench coat comments that the presence of these lookouts indicates their leader failed in his search too. Worried, the young man reflects that the entire security operation could be just a trap, but the older man considers that the big crime bosses might be acting separately now. Far from there, the red-haired youth with a bandage on his nose walks angrily, because nobody is answering his calls. Shouting in anger, the spoiled son of the director becomes furious upon realizing that his plans are not working. Behind him, the man in the suit tries to explain calmly that their strike team must have just left. Enraged, the red-haired boy turns around and yells, asking if the subordinate is defending their city rivals. Grabbing the suited man's collar, he demands respect and reminds him that he carries the same blood as the great director. Letting go of the suit, he walks away in anger because those idiots cannot do a single job right. Opening his old phone, the rebellious youth boasts about how he managed to survive on his own until today. He keeps complaining about his father's henchmen and claims that he also has his own strategic plan. With a dark smile, the boy closes the device, confident that his final move is going to work out great. Back at the site, the veteran in the trench coat concludes that the presence of the lookouts reveals the target's location. With that, the hooded young man remembers when he forcefully interrogated the henchman to get the address. In that memory, the prisoner begged for mercy and revealed that the correct location was the 4th district. Convinced, the young man asks his master to let the team leader know that they need to leave for that neighborhood. Without wasting time, the young hero starts running at high speed, determined to rescue his dear friend. At that moment, the ally shouts, trying to get the protagonist's attention, but he was already focused on leaving. So the hero runs off at high speed through the dark alley to go after clues about his friend. Meanwhile, the man in the trench coat speaks to the fallen opponent and warns that he knows he is still conscious. With his eyes glowing red, he asks if the troublemaker wants to tell the truth or prefers to take more of a beating. Next, the scene shows the rush through the city at night while the hero moves as fast as possible. He thinks everything would be simpler if his main rival were running this entire terrible operation. Upon arriving at the location, the hooded young man finds 5 delinquents gathered, who seem to be just waiting. With that, one of the bullies approaches the hero, mocking him for running away from school so long ago. Another criminal spits on the ground and asks if it really was the hooded young man who defeated the boss's spoiled hair. The guy keeps provoking him, asking what a nobody with no money thinks he is doing there all alone. Rolling up his sleeves, the attacker complains about having to clean up the young man's mess and prepares to strike him. But the protagonist just glares at the enemy in an intimidating way, showing no concern or fear whatsoever. In the blink of an eye, the hero catches the bully's punch and counters by delivering a brutal punch to his face. The opponent collapses to the ground completely defeated, while the hooded young man watches him with great coldness. Seeing their friend fall so fast, the rest of the delinquent group is left in complete shock. With his eyes glowing in fury, the hero warns that they keep acting and thinking like foolish little children. One of the henchmen begins to sweat cold, trembling in terror upon realizing that the opponent in front of him is a monster. The protagonist lowers his head, commenting that this is exactly why none of them will ever win. Without giving them time to react, the young man charges quickly to finish off the rest of the gang for good. The rival's eyes widen in terror as he sees the hero's blur approaching at an unbelievable speed. With a devastating punch, the young man strikes the opponent's chest, making him gasp from the force of the impact. The criminal is thrown far away and collapses on the deserted street without a chance to mount any defense. Fallen on the sidewalk, the bully groans in pain with his face all bruised and realizes he made the worst mistake of his life. The young hero keeps his serious expression while his hair covers his eyes in a dark look. Stepping hard on the ground with his yellow sneakers, the young man advances toward those who remain conscious there. The fallen delinquent grumbles about the director's son, while the hero positions himself in front of him coldly. With disdain, the protagonist asks what they think they can do acting like playground bullies there. Looking at his bruised hand, the young man concludes that the attack confirms the involvement of the spoiled hair. Desperate, the criminals argue, and the youngest one yells, telling them to call for backup from the floor below. Hearing that, the hero turns around with his eyes glowing like fire upon realizing there are more enemies there. Seeing the danger approach, the other bullies run up the stairs to try and help their partners. Far from there, the master reflects on how the young man's mind would be affected if they acted carelessly. The man in the suit remarks to the tattooed giant that the hero is much smarter than the other youths. Blowing out smoke from his cigarette, the muscular warrior agrees to observe the situation for a bit longer. The ally in the trench coat adds that the main villain acted fast and that the rival company has many men there. With that, the warrior says their main focus must be dealing with the company as soon as they find the girl. With a serious look, the experienced fighter asks what they will do regarding the whereabouts of the abducted young woman. The giant says he will watch the 2nd District and asks his partner to text him if anything happens. The veteran concludes that the split in forces among the enemy leaders represents a great opportunity. Back in the action, a henchman carries the abducted young woman with her arms tied while slowly walking up the steps. Climbing the dark stairs, the man carries the unconscious body of the hostage without showing any remorse. On the outside, 2 henchmen walk peacefully and hum down the alley, noticing no danger at all. The fellow carrying the young woman thanks the boss for his orders, saying he learned something very valuable today. Hidden behind a wall, the scout observes the group putting the hostage in the car and finds the behavior suspicious. Quickly, the hidden ally takes out his phone and reports that the rival team is not at that location. Wearing his work uniform, the man asks what the next orders of action should be from now on. Back in the fight, the panting hero faces the rest of his opponents, keeping his look cold and focused. With extreme force, the hooded young man steps on the fallen bully's chest to make sure he does not get up. Letting out a long sigh, the young man looks at the several defeated opponents lying on the ground of that dark alley. Turning to the enemy, he asks if their only goal there was just to buy time in the fight. On the ground, the fallen delinquent complains about the discomfort, while the young hero looks down at him coldly. Then the young man quickly crouches down and grabs the arm of the opponent, who asks fearfully what he wants. With that, the protagonist goes through the rival's pockets and announces he is going to borrow his phone for a while. The henchman struggles angrily and yells at the hero, trying to stop him from taking his phone away, but the hooded young man delivers a precise strike to shut the insolent guy's mouth once and for all. With another powerful attack, he drops the opponent onto the asphalt, leaving him with absolutely no chance to react. With his eyes glowing red, the young man mocks the henchman, reminding him that this is what friends do. He stands over the bruised body and repeats that he is just borrowing his partner's device. Right after, the young man starts using the old phone, looking through the last received calls. Answering the call, the hero hears the spoiled hair screaming orders for his henchman to finish him off already. Very calmly, the young man responds directly to the red-haired guy, telling him to stop this if he wants to live. He warns over the phone that he only tolerated his rival's games back in school, but outside of it, things have changed. On the other end of the line, the rich kid gets furious and yells, asking why the hero is the one answering. Ignoring his rival's screams, the young man just closes the old phone and lets out a tired sigh in the alley. With a dark smile, the young man concludes that the spoiled hair really was behind all this trouble. He prepares a final stomp on the henchman to ensure the guy never tries to attack him like that again. But the hero stops his foot in mid-air at the last second, remembering a very important detail of the mission. He decides to pull back and tells the tattooed giant that the two of them must head down from the location to continue the search. The big guy nods and warns that their time is running out and they need to be very fast. So the two allies walk quickly through the dark alley, leaving the knocked-out group of delinquents behind. As they walk, the hooded young man lets out another heavy sigh, feeling the immense pressure of saving his friend. With disdain, the young man throws the rival's phone high into the air to get rid of any enemy tracker. The green device lands on the hard asphalt and slides down the deserted street, breaking from the impact of the fall. With that, the screen of the broken phone starts to glow, showing that the red-haired boy was trying to call back. In another part of the city, the driver tells his boss that he will wait in the back seat of the dark vehicle. The suited mafia boss complains, quite annoyed, saying that the cargo does not belong to his crew. In anger, he strikes his subordinate hard, telling him to shut his mouth once and for all. The mobster looks at the employee with an ironic smile and asks why he is staring like that. Suddenly, a group of masked men appears in the alley, leaving the leader in the suit extremely enraged. Without warning, the new intruders charge forward with clubs in hand to start a violent clash in the alley. With that, the boss in the suit realizes that the client withheld important information about the dangerous job. Seeing his men get beaten, the mobster complains that he will have to charge much more for all this trouble. He yells furiously into the phone, demanding explanations from his ally for making things easy for their rivals. One of his subordinates runs past and warns desperately that they have no more time to stay there. The fight becomes totally chaotic, with powerful punches and kicks being thrown in every direction. A brutal strike hits one of the suited men square in the face, splattering blood against the dark alley wall. The mafia leader gets confused because he thought the opponents were just weak delinquents from that district. But the masked men keep overpowering the guards in suits with an incredible sequence of attacks. A fast fist cuts through the air toward the next opponent, showing the relentless fury of that rival group. Meanwhile, the muscular driver fights back, delivering a devastating punch that knocks the attacker to the ground. Another powerful blow strikes the face of one more opponent, making dust rise from the street with the heavy impact. The subordinate yells to his mafia boss, warning him that they need to escape from there immediately. Desperate, the man in the suit runs to his imported vehicle, swearing heavily about this whole disaster. He takes the wheel completely terrified while shouting that he finally understands the gravity of the situation. The car speeds off, leaving behind the terrible clash between his men and the intruders. With a look of fury, the mobster vows revenge against the rival company that caused all this loss. The vehicle speeds up the district hill, screeching tires in the middle of the dark night silence. Suddenly, an out-of-control motorcycle comes sliding down the asphalt, throwing sparks all over the ground. The two-wheeled vehicle crashes violently into the side of the mobster's car, creating a huge impact. In the driver's seat, the mafia leader screams in absolute despair, not understanding what was happening there. Catching his breath on the asphalt, the hero thinks to himself that he barely escaped being caught in the impact. With his eyes glowing in fury, he decides to focus all his attention on discovering the enemy hideout. With that, he vows in his thoughts that none of the kidnappers will leave that final confrontation in one piece. Without mercy, the hooded young man lands a devastating punch that completely breaks the opponent's defense. But desperation begins to take over the young man, who realizes he is running out of time to save his friend. He delivers another brutal kick while blaming himself for leaving the girl in danger because of him. Knocking the lookout down the stairs, the young man berates himself for promising to protect her and failing the mission. With that, the hero fixes his dark glare, recalling with bitterness the promises he made in the recent past. His hatred burns even more intensely as he charges forward, determined to rescue the hostage from the rival gang. The gray-haired partner tries to calm him down, commenting that they actually just had very bad luck today. But the tattooed giant advances in silence, warning that apologizing will not solve the current situation. Focused on the goal, the protagonist keeps his reddish eyes firmly fixed on the path he must follow. Looking ahead, the allies spot a mysterious figure standing under the dim light of the street lamps. With a deadly look, the hero turns quickly, ready to face any threat that appears there. In his mind, the determination to wipe out the troublemakers grows with every passing second of that fight. Inside the crashed vehicle, the mobster hits his head against the steering wheel due to the heavy force of the crash. Gritting his teeth, he rants furiously against the district, complaining about not being able to escape that nightmare. With that, a hand with green restraints appears by surprise from behind the seat and grabs the suited leader's neck. The man begins to gasp, not understanding where that perfectly aimed surprise attack on his neck came from. A flashback reveals the girl watching closely as the master teaches defense techniques to the hero. In the memory, the young woman paid close attention to the instructions because she knew the great danger of their reality. The restraint move is demonstrated clearly so that none of them would be left defenseless in the near future. Back in the present, the hostage tightens the grip on the mobster's neck using her own ties, defending herself with fury. Thinking angrily, she regrets being caught by surprise from behind and maintains the pressure of the hold. The troublemaker tries to breathe with difficulty and struggles desperately to break free from the choke. But he manages to break loose and shouts angrily, saying he will have no mercy on her after that audacity. With a violent shove, the mobster grabs the young woman and threatens her for breaking their agreement. Suddenly, the vehicle door is ripped off, revealing the gray-haired ally with eyes glowing with rage. The young man grabs the attacker by the collar of his suit and pulls him out of the vehicle with extreme force. He throws the mobster violently against the cold asphalt, leaving the opponent completely defenseless on the ground. Recovering, the criminal stands up, massaging his sore neck while letting out a tired sigh. With a dirty face, he glares at the hero, furiously trying to figure out who those fearless kids were. But the gray-haired ally just looks at him with disdain, mocking the weakness of that supposed leader. Annoyed, the troublemaker tries to throw a fast punch, yelling that they forgot what it means to get beaten for real. The veteran criminal mocks him, asking if now that the young man made some money, he decided to lose his mind too. Smiling sardonically, the mobster says his rival got way too excited over landing a single strike. But the gray-haired young man keeps his body steady and prepares to unleash all his fury on him. Quickly, the young man blocks the new advance and says he was looking forward to meeting the scoundrel in person. He says he would never work for the criminal if he were not in a difficult financial situation. In another moment, the hero's team leader advises the ally to maintain discretion on the streets for now. The young man in the trench coat comments that their actions might be a bit questionable under the city's laws. The bearded leader states that they do not need fast money and that they do not tolerate exploiting young people like that. Disagreeing, the partner questions how they will explain the lack of profits to their mysterious superior. Back in the fight, the young man lands an incredible punch, saying his rival confuses money with skill. With another strike, the youth states that his rival is not fit to lead, and that hitting rock bottom is exactly where he belongs. Totally battered, the mobster grits his teeth, feeling the immense physical pain of that merciless counter-attack. He tries to throw a desperate punch, but the gray-haired young man blocks the strike with ease. With extreme speed, the ally connects a devastating punch right to the opponent's solar plexus. The criminal's eyes widen as he completely loses his breath, realizing his defeat there was inevitable. To finish the fight, the young man lands an overwhelming uppercut that knocks out the suited mafia leader on the spot. With an extremely powerful punch, the gray-haired young man completely breaks the troublemaker's resistance. The mobster collapses, defeated near his vehicle, while the ally warns that his time there is running out. With that, the gray-haired youth grabs the fallen opponent's leg and begins to drag him away without any mercy. Under the street lamp's light, the young man restrains the mobster while the bearded veteran just observes the whole situation. The troublemaker's body is dragged across the cold asphalt, leaving a trail of dust in the middle of the dark street today. Shortly after, the bearded man walks alongside the rescued young woman while the two observe the city lights. He turns around and tells the girl to go into the safe hideout to ensure her own protection. With a disheartened look, the young woman just nods her head and accepts the orders given by the bearded veteran. The man praises her decision, commenting that getting into debt and losing one's head was no way to live. Hearing the comment about her friend, the girl's steps stop suddenly, and she lets out a sad sigh right there. At that moment, she looks at the experienced leader and tries to explain that things are actually not how he thinks. The scene cuts to a memory where a soldier shouts desperately, ordering the team to pull back from that combat.